let's start a little bit about telling me a little bit about your family, what year were you born, and where you grew up.
I was born in Chorostkov, Poland, which is now part of the Ukraine. In 1938, uh, we had a population of about 2,200 and some Jewish people. You know, it was called the Pale, and I stayed there till the end of 1944, when we were liberated by the Russians. Then we traveled with the Russians, with the Russian army, to Romania, then to Hungary, then into Bulgaria. From Bulgaria, we got into Turkey. From Turkey, we crossed into Palestine. And when we came to Palestine, it was illegal. So we wound up in Atlit, which is a prisoner of war camp. The British put us in a prisoner of war camp.
Oh my.
So,
Now you're born in 1938.
yeah.
So you're away from Kristallnacht in Germany. Things were completely underway as far as Poland and Germany with the war starting.
Well, you have to understand, for me, the war didn't start in 39.
Right.
For me, the war started in 41.
Right.
So I remember the Germans when they came in.
You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
You were 2.
3 years old.
Three.
3 years old.
And you remember
Was just after my 3rd birthday they came in. I was born in June, they came in at sometime in July.
Tell me what you remember.
Well, I remember the Germans came in. They had to cross the bridge. We lived right near the Dniester. And there was a bridge, and they crossed the bridge. There was a motorcycle with a sidecar. Then there was like a little command car, I don't know, like an armored personnel carrier. Then there was trucks and trucks of soldiers behind that. And I remember the soldiers were hungry, and we fed them. My mother made kasha, and she fed the German soldiers. And you know what's funny? They were the Wehrmacht, which was like the regular army. And they told us to get out before the SS and the Gestapo come there. But we didn't have where to go. Where were we supposed to go? There was nowhere for us to run, so we stayed. And not long after they came in, which was in 1941, around the end of 41, they put us in a ghetto. In Chorostkov, we had our own ghetto. They put all the people there, and then every day they would come and take like 200, 300 people, the men first, and put them on the train, and that was it. They were gone. Then we stayed in the ghetto in Chorostkov till the end of 1942. And then there just weren't enough Jews left for them to have a ghetto in Chorostkov. So they moved us into Kopyczynce, which was like 6 kilometers, which is about 3 miles, another town near us. And they put us in the ghetto there. And we stayed in Kopyczynce from the end of 1942 till around the middle of till almost the end of 1943. And then they liquidated the ghetto and they sent us to camp. We went to Jablonica. I guess I was one of the lucky ones. My mother was a cook and my father was a confectioner. In other words, he could bake and make chocolates and all that. So they worked in the kitchen. That's one of the reasons we survived.
You worked in the kitchen in the camp?
In the camp. But they didn't cook for the Jews. They cooked for the German soldiers.
Right.
And that's how we survived till 1944.
You were a toddler.
Well,
How,
I was 3 when the Germans came in.
right,
I was 5, almost 5 when we went to camp.
How, how were you, where were you during the day when your parents were working? Were you with them?
I was working. I was working, yeah. We were, I don't know how to explain it. We were, the camp we had, where the kitchen was a filverik. It was like a farm co-op. We would gather food and they would grow fruit and things. It was to feed the German army. And that's what I was doing. My mother, me, my father, they would work in the kitchen and also work in the field. And I worked in the fields. Just to pick potatoes and apples and whatever else there was, you know.
Were you able to eat them?
Oh, no, no, no. There were German soldiers to watch us. We were, as a matter of fact, one of these times when we were coming back from the field and we had a wagon with a load of, I think, potatoes in it, and we were pushing it. The German took the rifle and hit my mother with the butt right in the back. Till the day she died, she was suffering from that. He hit her right in the spine. So she suffered from that till the day she died. She also had a bad knee. I don't remember from what, probably. I had a piece of shrapnel here in my left thigh, right here. I still have the scar. I have a very faint scar here, and you can see right there, it's a bullet hole. So I didn't get away scot-free. As a matter of fact, I have a letter from the German government stating that they're going to pay me my medical bills. I never got a penny from them. Never. I have the letter from the German embassy, a legal, you know, never got a cent from them.
Can I ask you a question? When you saw this German soldier, officer, whatever he was, hit your mother in the back, how did you feel? Do you remember?
How did I feel? Scared. This is not the only thing I saw. I saw in the ghetto a Jew was walking, and there was a German officer with a leather coat, and he had, I think you call him here, it wasn't really a nightstick. It's more like a rubber hose with a lead pipe with a rubber hose on top of it. And when he passed the Jew, I don't know why, maybe the Jew didn't smell right, or he didn't need a reason. He just hit him like this, right in the back of the head. He split his head wide open. That's nothing. But when he did it, he got splashed with blood, the German. He got mad. I think we call it, he lost his cool. He started cursing and kicking the Jew and blaming him for splashing him with blood. He took off his coat and threw it away because it had Jewish blood on it. It was the Jew's fault that he splashed him with blood. He did it on purpose. That takes, you know. Later on, I saw another thing that I can never forget. They were leading Jews to be shot. You know, there was a column of Jews, and there was a woman holding a baby in her hands, 2, 3 years old. The baby was crying. The German guard took the baby from her by the feet, smashed the head against the wall, and gave the baby back to the mother. So, you know, killed it, but he gave the baby back to the mother because the The mother just hugged it and kept on walking. They didn't live very long because they had the grave ready for them. They just took them over to the grave and shot them. So they're nice people, the Germans. And
But you were a 3, 4, 5-year-old child
Yeah.
remembering this.
yes,
It must have just.
that's why I've been sick all my life. You know, that to this day, I haven't slept one night to sleep through a night. To this day. You have to understand that from our town, there were about 17 survivors. I'm talking that survived in town. I'm not talking like one of my uncles survived because he was, when the Russians came in 39, he was drafted. There was a lot of them drafted. A lot of the young men were drafted. Some of them survived. I'm not talking about this, but I'm talking to people who were in town. About 17 of us were left alive. 3 of us were children.
Out of 2,200.
About 2,217 people. I was a child, but I was never a child. Take my word for it. I learned to survive before I learned the ABCs. If you didn't survive. As a matter of fact, if you go and look at the statistics, children who were born like in 38, 39, there are very, very few. Very. Most of the ones that did survive are the children that were hidden. But they are not survivors. Were the hidden children. There were there's a few hundred, but those were the hidden children. People that were given to the Christians to hide. But very few of the children in the camps would survive. One of the reasons I survived with my sisters was that my mother and father worked in the kitchen.
You said you learned to survive before you learned the ABCs.
Yes.
It's a very powerful thing to say. Tell me what you learned to do.
What I learned to do? I learned not to make noise. I learned when a German was around to hide. If you see a German, you hide. Because they could just kill you for no reason. They could just take the gun out and shoot you and not even think about it. I remember there was an air raid, and we were separated, and I grabbed my mother and pulled her in to hide. We hid in a hedgerow. Now, you tell me how many 4 years old will do that. I remember before we went to camp, which was in beginning of 1944, there was a pogrom or a raid or whatever you want to call it. And after the pogrom, we went to look. We were hidden, and we went to look to see. We knew where people were hidden. We went to look and find out who was found and who wasn't found. And we found my grandfather. He was shot in the bunker, or, it was an underground in the basement. And he was like sitting against the wall, and he was holding his sister in his lap. Now, he was dead, but his sister was still alive. She was shot. She died about 2 weeks later. But he was comforting her when he died. It's not something you forget. I remember another time I was with my mother and sister when the program started, and we didn't know where my father was. So we hid out in the bunker where my grandfather had been, where he was found. The bunker was open. We didn't have a chance to go and hide out where we were supposed to. So we just hid in there. We figured they had been there already. It's open. They're not going to look. So we went and hid in there. And we did survive. And then after the program was over, my sister went out to see what happened to my father. I was sitting with my mother in the bunker, and my sister went out because she put on a kerchief, you know, like the Christians, and she went to look for my father, and she found him. Those are things you don't forget.
Who was responsible for the program?
The Germans.
The Germans.
Germans.
It was Germans.
It was a raid.
It wasn't the Poles. It was.
Oh, we had the Poles with
I mean, it was an axiom then. So.
yeah, an actie. Program and actie, it's almost the same thing. The Poles weren't our friends. A lot of Jews would have survived because the Germans wouldn't recognize us. Like, I don't look like a Jew. My mother, no way does she look Jewish. But the Poles betrayed us. But hey, it's a Jew. You know, they'd point you out right away. You couldn't hide anywhere because they knew where all the hideouts were. They were just as familiar with the forests as we were. My father's youngest sister was in the partisans, in the Jewish partisans. You have to understand that we had different partisans. We had the Jewish partisans, and we had the Russian partisans, and then we had the Ukrainian partisans, they were the worst. Because I don't know if you know that in 1941, when in 41, when the Germans attacked Poland, the Ukrainian part of Poland they were part of Russia, but they were the Ukraine. They had their own army. They betrayed the Russians and fought with the Germans against the Russian army. And those were under General Petlirovitz. So when the Germans started retreating and the Russians advancing in 44, the Russians were hunting those Petlirovцы. So there was fighting between the Russians and the Ukrainian underground, the partisans. My father's youngest sister was in the Jewish partisans. She was killed 2 weeks after we were liberated by the Ukrainian partisans. Okay, so really the war for us never really ended. I can tell you that in 1947 in Poland, I buried tons and tons of soap made from Jewish fat. The Germans needed fat to make soap. There were big brown bars and was marked Rhein Judenfett on it. And you know, in Jewish tradition, we had to bury everything has to be buried. So we buried tons of it.
Where did you find that?
In Poland.
Specific
This was actually after the war. I was in Germany, and that's where we found the soap, in Breslau. That was in Breslau, Germany. Now it's, you see, it's a mishmash in there. It was Germany before the war. Now it's part of Poland, so that's why I say it's Poland. But it was actually Germany, the part of Germany that the Polish took after the war. I remember the Germans leaving. They were kicked out of Breslau. They were with little hand carts, and they were just marched out of Breslau, thousands, hundreds of thousands of them.
And it became the Soviet zone.
It became Poland, not the Soviet zone. Became Poland. It was part of the Soviet, behind the Iron Curtain, but it was Poland. I was never really in Russia. I was in Poland. Then it was when the Russians went, we marched with them into Poland, but we never went into Russia. So we were in Poland all the time.
Was your family prior, as far back as you could remember, were you observant Jews? Were you
Yes.
religious
Oh,
Jews?
yes.
Tell me about that while in the ghetto. Tell me about some of the rituals.
Well, how do I say it? Even in the ghetto, we had Cheder. We observed a Saturday as much as we could. It was illegal. If the Germans would catch you, they'd kill you. But we still did it. And, as much as we could, we still did it. Not that there was much we could do, but we still observed the holidays. We still observed, Friday night, and as much as we could.
Tell me about what you remember. Tell me how you did it and what happened. What you were able to try to get away with.
Well, I went to Cheder. We had the rabbi and all the people, they were the first ones to be taken out. But we had religious Jews, and they took over the job of teaching the children. So they taught us, praying and all that. We had a little room, but it didn't last very long because 2-3 months, and then there was no children left. You have to understand something. A lot of Jewish mothers could have survived the war, but they didn't. They wouldn't be separated from the children. And in the Germans, instead of making a fuss, take the children away and from the mothers, and the mother would start crying, and the children, if the mother would object, okay. A lot of children they took away from the mothers. A lot of children lost their mothers because, when you're in a transport, a lot of people died in the trains and on the roads and things. But a lot of the mothers could have been saved, but they wouldn't be separated from their children. So they were gassed or shot or whatever. There was not that much to remember, we got our rations of bread. We got 600 calories a day. And it was weighed very, very carefully. The people who weighed it, they had a scale. And let me tell you, if they would try to give you an extra gram, they would get shot. Because there were Germans. A lot of people think there were no Germans there. There were guards everywhere. You couldn't turn around. People think that there were no Germans. There were. There were thousands of them. It's true, some of them were not what you would call frontline soldiers. Some of them were the older. Some of them were, I don't know what you call them, like second-grade soldiers. But they were still armed soldiers with dogs and machine guns. And there were a lot of them. And we could do nothing. We didn't have, here, I have weapons in my home. I couldn't do that in Poland. You know what I'm saying? Here, I can defend myself. I couldn't defend myself in Poland. That's a big difference. I think a lot of people would have survived if they would have had weapons. But another thing is, nobody would believe that those things would happen. My grandfather was an officer in the Kaiser's army. Okay? I have a picture of him in his uniform. He was an officer in the Zeppelins, which was at that time the Air Force. And those people could not believe they were considered themselves part, they were citizens, that those things could happen. A lot of people just wouldn't believe it. They just couldn't believe that those things could happen. And let me tell you another thing. We had a lot of Jewish traitors too.
Tell me
They,
about that.
they thought that they could save their life, by working for the Germans.
Are there any instances of that you remember?
Yes.
Tell me about that.
We had the Judenrat. That was called the Jewish police. And one of the men on the Judenrat, he was, he wasn't on friendly terms with two Jewish brothers. And he knew where they were, and he betrayed them to the Germans. And he survived the war. I know where he is. He's
Today?
living in Poland. Well, I don't know if he's still alive today, but the last time I saw him was in the 60s. He came to Poland to visit.
Did you talk to him?
Yeah.
How was
He
it?
knew that I could hang him. He knew that.
And why didn't you?
Let me tell you something. Enough Jews have been killed. Besides, they're saying you don't launder dirty laundry in the public. So he had a wife and children. He wasn't the only one. There was a lot of, but something funny, very few of them survived. The camp where I was, there was a Mr., I believe his name was Pollock. When they shot him and he fell in the grave, he wasn't dead. He just passed out, and he was buried. And he got out of the grave, and he survived. As a matter of fact, I saw him in the States. He lived in Cleveland, I believe. He was a photographer.
What did your parents tell you at 5, 6 years old? Do you remember talking about the ghetto and what was happening to the world?
I remember one time we were going into the bunker and the wall collapsed. It was a long dugout and the wall collapsed, and I was trapped in there. And my father and my uncle dug me out. They had to give me artificial respiration to bring me back. I remember always to have to be quiet. I remember one time during a raid, I started crying. And my parents were in there. There were two brothers that are in New Jersey. And there was somebody else, I don't remember who, I think, in there. And because I was crying and the Germans were there, they threw a blanket on me and they smothered me. And I don't remember after that anything, but they say that they gave me artificial respiration and they brought me back. I've been dead a few times. I had, when the bullet grazed me here, it just cut me. If it would have been going not straight, it would have taken my head off. but it just cut the skin right between over my nose, between my eyes. Just a straight cut. Cut this. I swelled up like this. I couldn't see anything for about 2 weeks. Well, I was
You were how old?
for about 4.5. I got this. I remember my mother took her kerchief. She dug the bullet out and took her kerchief, and I don't remember what, something in the kerchief, and tied it up to stop the bleeding. I remember this was very painful. I have a mark about that size on a shell. You know, they were bombing, and a shell hit me here and kicked me live, went flying. Don't remember how long. It took a long time for that to heal. So, but I remember the most important thing was quiet. You had to be quiet. No talking, no crying. A lot of, it was terror. You know, you lived in all the time, like pressure. You know, you couldn't talk loud, you couldn't cry, forget playing. There was no such thing as playing or anything. And, I remember my grandmother, they found her in the bunker. They found her 2 daughters and 2 daughters-in-law, and there was about 7 grandchildren, and they all went to Bergen-Belsen, to the gas chamber. That armband I have, it was made by my grandmother. She was a seamstress, so she made that for me.
Your parents survived
Yes,
because they could cook.
yes.
So essentially, skill is what saved their life.
And money.
And money.
Lots and lots and lots of money.
You survived because you knew the drill and the rules early on.
Oh, yes. Quiet.
Your sister did not survive.
My sister survived too.
She did.
Yeah, she was 4 years older than me.
She was older than you.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah, she was 4 years older.
Okay. And she
She survived.
survived. It was just the 4 of you.
4 of us.
Your grandparents did not. I'm sorry, it was your
No.
grandfather's sister. That's what I was thinking.
No,
Your
my grandfather did not survive.
His sister did not survive.
My grandmother did not survive. My paternal grandmother did not survive. None of them survived.
Liberation Day.
I did not have Liberation Day. We were liberated by the Russians. There was no such thing as Liberation Day because the Russians did not have a front like the Americans did. All of a sudden you'd see a Russian soldier with a pepeshka running and chasing the Germans, and they didn't take any German prisoners, let me tell you. They just shot them because they didn't have time to take prisoners. And what would they do with them?
We have heard from some survivors that talked about some did not know they were coming, some had heard the bombs, some had heard from the underground that Russians were coming, or if they
Oh,
were-
we
Have
heard
you
the
heard-
bombing, and we heard the cannons. I saw the Katyushas firing, but
But did you know what that meant for you? Did you know that meant maybe help was coming?
no,
No, you
no,
didn't know.
no.
You just knew the noise.
We knew they were
Were there any
fighting.
indications to you at all that there was possible
No,
liberation?
because of the time frame. It wasn't a day or 2. There was fighting going on for months. They were back and forth and back and forth. It wasn't like, you know what I'm saying.
Right. Go ahead.
I mean, you say like you learned all these lessons. You learned to be quiet. You learned not to cry. You learned all this, and then for you, in some ways, you weren't liberated. The war never seemed to end
No.
to you.
Because we traveled with the Russian army, with the front.
what lessons do you still carry that, I mean, it
What
seems- it
lessons
seems-
do I carry?
Well, I mean, it seems that it's almost like
I've
you never
survived
say-
till now. That's the lessons I've carried. How many of me, people like me survived?
Can you tell us where you went, you know, when, I think Don was asking, so I'll ask again. When you were able to move away from the Germans, even if you weren't liberated?
Yes,
You were.
with the Russian army.
moving
We
with
traveled with the Russian
Do
army.
do you remember that as an incident, as an event?
Oh, yes, sure.
Can you tell us about that?
Well, we traveled with the Russian army. You have to understand that a lot of the Russian army had a lot of Jews in it. As a matter of fact, one of the generals was from our town, was in the Russian army. He was a polkovnik, which is, I think, what you call either a colonel or he was in charge of a division. So I don't know what you call it. He was a polkovnik. He was from our town. The last time I saw him, he was still in Poland. And but we met others. As a matter of fact, I saw a documentary, and I saw one of them in Kharkov when the Russian army came in. One of the people from our town was in the Russian army marching in that parade. So we traveled with the Russian army.
So as a refugee, did you?
Yes,
Push your
yes,
belongings?
yes, yes. We didn't have any belongings. We traveled with the Russian army in their trucks, or a lot of them they had wagons, horse-drawn wagons. That's how we traveled. Or on foot, we walked, or whatever, all the way till we got to Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, we took a train to Turkey. And that's when really I was liberated in Turkey.
When was that?
The end of 1944.
Can I back you up a minute? So you're traveling as attachments, really, as refugee attachments?
Yes, there were a lot of us.
Right, to the Russian army. Did they take care of you? Did they share their food with
Yes,
you?
yes. Yeah, we ate with them. Not that they had much food themselves. I remember getting American chocolate bars. They captured a German transport, the Russians. And the German transport were loaded with Cadbury bars. So we had Cadbury bars. They were hard as rock, those chocolate bars.
But who cares,
They were
right?
delicious.
Who cares?
Oh,
You were with your mother and your father and your
Yeah.
sister.
and no, yes, but there were a lot of us. We picked up a bunch of, what do you call, like an orphanage, and they traveled with us, and we traveled all the way to Palestine, like a whole bunch of refugees.
How many people would you?
On foot?
Always on foot, by train, by truck, by wagon, a lot of us. As I'll tell you something.
How many, you say a lot, would you say thousands?
Oh,
hundreds,
no, there was
Hundreds,
about 40, 50 of us.
40 or 50?
Yeah.
Okay.
There were a lot of older children, and there was, I remember a couple, a man and a daughter, and then was a mother and a daughter, and, leftovers, things that survived, they got attached. And in Turkey, Ben Gurion came to Turkey to meet us. We were the first Jews, and the doctor gave us something like tar. And we all looked black. We had it all over us. We had to put it on, it looked like black tar. I don't remember what it was.
Where did you go from the camp?
From which camp?
From that last place you were at
In
in
Athlete?
Palestine? You went to Italy?
No, yeah. From in 1946, we got attached to the Anderson Army, And with the Anderson Army, we went to Italy. We stayed in Cinecittà. At that time, it was
Film?
it's a movie center, but at that time, it was a refugee camp.
Near Rome?
Yeah. And we stayed there until there's a collection made, a whole bunch of the Anderson Army, and we returned to Poland.
And then you lived in Poland for how long?
We returned to Poland January, February of 1947, and I stayed till October of 1950. And then we went to Israel,
How long did you live in Israel?
about 18 months, and then we went to Germany. And from Germany, went to Canada, and from Canada, we came here.
What brought you to Tennessee?
My children lived, I have 3 children, and they lived, one lives in Shelbyville, 2 lived in Manchester. No, 2 lived in Shelbyville and 1 in Manchester. So when I got retired, I got hurt and retired in 95, I moved to Manchester. Wanted to be with the kids.
When you look back on your experience, which is extraordinary, what do you remember the most? When you talk
Terror.
about it,
Terror.
When you share it with children,
You
students.
can't. Would you believe me? My children have never spoken to me about the war. They don't know what I went through. They don't know anything about it.
Why is that?
I don't know. I'll tell you honestly, I have not spoken about the war until I came here to Tennessee about 2-3 years ago. My daughter had told this school in Manchester, I have a daughter that's my granddaughter. I adopted my granddaughter. And she told the school about that I was a survivor, so they asked me to talk to the class about 3 years ago as the first time I had spoken about the war since the war with anybody. Like I have aunties and uncles who survived the war. They never speak about the war. I never spoke to my parents about the war. We never talk about the war.
Is that because you were trying to,
Forget. It's not a pleasant memory. It's not something you want to remember.
You said you haven't slept a decent night.
No.
What is
I take a nap. I sleep 15 minutes or half an hour or 45 minutes. I'm up, go take another nap. I don't sleep.
We have another survivor who has to keep 4 loaves of bread in her kitchen at all times. We have someone else that has to keep cases of bottled water in the garage.
You see that? I have to have that.
why?
Why?
So I can call. So I don't feel cut off. I have to be able, I'm very claustrophobic. I don't, I'm not afraid of flying, but I'm afraid of being in an airplane because I'm closed in. I can't get off. I don't go on a bus because I can't get off the bus when I want to. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, absolutely.
I have to have my freedom. In the car, when I get stuck in traffic, I have a problem. Many times I get stuck in traffic, I walk out of the car.
You want to be in control of what's happening.
Exactly. I have to be in control. I don't want to be, I have to be.
Is there
Wow.
anything you'd like to add? I can't, speechless.
Very little. I'll just tell you one thing. The only thing I'd like to add, even to this day, the Germans are still the same. I was in Germany in 1973, and they didn't know I spoke their language. And they still hate the Americans. And they still hate the Jews. So nothing has changed. In Poland, they still, I'll tell you a little funny anecdote. In 1949, I was in Poland in school. And we went on an outing. I lived in Wrocław. And we went to Krakow. And we went to what you call like a national monument. They have it's called the Yama Krakowska. And there was a priest there. He was in charge. There was like a chapel. Well, when we were a Jewish school, he called us dirty Jews. Why don't you go to Palestine? We don't need you in Poland. Father Wojtek, he's now the Pope. How do you like those beans? He's the Pope. Father Wojtek.